There comes a moment in the silent journey of awakening when the awakened one begins to drift away, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. To those still lost in the noise of the world, this withdrawal may look like loneliness, but to the awakened, it is liberation, a retreat not from people, but from illusions. When one begins to see clearly, the constant chatter of human drama becomes a faint echo, and the soul naturally seeks silence, like a river returning to the sea. Alan Watts often said that awakening is not about becoming special, but about realizing there was never anyone to be special. In this realization, the awakened person sees through the layers of identity, opinion, and expectation that once defined relationships. Conversations once filled with meaning now sound like rehearsed scripts, and the awakened no longer finds comfort in pretending. They step back, not to judge but to breathe. The space between themselves and others becomes sacred, a necessary distance for clarity to blossom. This withdrawal is not rejection. It is the deep compassion of seeing how entangled humanity has become in its own desires. The awakened feels the pull of that web, yet knows the futility of struggling within it. So they choose stillness. They choose to walk away, to listen instead of speak, to observe instead of react. In doing so, they honor the truth that awakening cannot be shared through words. It must be lived, quietly, like incense filling a room without effort. But solitude, in its purest form, is not loneliness. It is communion with the source of all things. The awakened withdraws not to escape life, but to merge more deeply with it, to feel the pulse of existence without the interference of human noise. In this silence, they discover that the universe is not empty, but overflowing. It speaks through the wind, the waves, the breath. And in that sacred stillness, they find what they have been seeking all along, themselves, unguarded and whole. So when the awakened withdraw from everyone, it is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is the gentle fading of illusion before the dawn of truth. They have not abandoned the world. They have simply stopped trying to fix it. For as Alan Watts would say, you don't transform the world by struggling against it. You transform it by understanding that it was never separate from you. When Alan Watts spoke about awakening, he often compared it to waking from a dream you didn't know you were having. At first, everything feels unsettling. Familiar faces, familiar places, yet something inside you knows they're not what they seemed. The awakened one begins to see that most human interactions are built on roles, not reality. We wear masks so convincingly that we forget their costumes. But once consciousness pierces through the veil, the awakened can no longer pretend. They start stepping away, not because they no longer care, but because they finally see that caring doesn't mean clinging. This realization carries both peace and pain. Peace, because the awakened no longer seeks validation from others. Pain, because they must watch those still asleep chase shadows and call them light. The awakened one walks through the same world but no longer belongs to it. What once felt vibrant now feels noisy. What once felt intimate now feels hollow. It is not the world that has changed. It is perception. Alan Watts described it as the moment when the actor stops believing he is the character, and in that moment, the entire play loses its hypnotic power. People often misinterpret this withdrawal as coldness. They think the awakened have lost love, but in truth, they have discovered a love so vast that it no longer fits into human terms. It is not love for a person or an ideal. It is love for the very essence of existence. But that kind of love demands stillness, space, and solitude. It is not loud or needy. It flows quietly, like a river beneath the surface. The awakened withdraw not to isolate themselves, but to allow that deeper love to breathe without distortion. The most painful part of awakening is realizing how much of human connection is based on fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being unseen, fear of silence. So, when the awakened embrace solitude, they are not running from life, but walking toward truth. They see that silence is not emptiness, but fullness. It is the place where the divine whispers. And in that quiet, the awakened finally hears the music behind all things, a rhythm that was always there, drowned by the noise of wanting. So they withdraw gently, not out of rejection, but reverence. They begin to understand that no one can be forced to awaken, just as no one can be forced to see the sunrise before dawn. Alan Watts often said, "You cannot make someone see the light by shouting at the darkness." The awakened know this deeply. They no longer try to convince. They simply live as a quiet example, a reminder that peace is not found in escaping the world, but in no longer needing it to be different. As the awakened one moves further into this new awareness, something extraordinary happens. The idea of self begins to dissolve. Alan Watts called this the great letting go, the moment when you stop trying to hold yourself together. You see that the person you thought you were was never real, just a collection of stories and reactions passed down from others. The awakened begin to live without armor, and that vulnerability, instead of making them weaker, becomes their greatest strength. They no longer need to defend, argue, or prove anything. Their very presence becomes an act of quiet rebellion against the chaos of ego. This dissolution of identity changes how they see others. No longer are people separate beings to be compared or judged. They are mirrors, each reflecting fragments of the same consciousness. The awakened begin to notice how everyone is simply playing out their part, believing it to be the whole truth. Compassion naturally arises, not as pity, but as understanding. Alan Watts often said that compassion is not about helping others wake up, but about realizing they were never truly asleep, only dreaming. The awakened sees the dream for what it is and stops taking it personally. But there's a paradox here. The more awake one becomes, the harder it is to communicate what they've discovered. Words feel clumsy, inadequate. Language itself belongs to the dream. It divides, labels, and limits. The awakened tries to speak, but every explanation feels like distortion. So, they begin to speak less and listen more. In silence, they find truth unspoken. And in that silence, they recognize that all things are connected, that the separation between self and other, life and death, beginning and end, is nothing but a play of perception. As their understanding deepens, the awakened no longer fears being misunderstood. They stop explaining themselves, stop trying to fit back into old conversations. They understand that not everyone can hear silence. They no longer resent this. Instead, they smile, a quiet, knowing smile, because they remember when they too were lost in the dream. Alan Watts called this the cosmic laugh, the moment when you realize that everything you took so seriously was just the universe playing hide and seek with itself. The awakened no longer takes sides in the play. They simply enjoy the unfolding of it. And in this gentle surrender, the awakened finds peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on circumstances, but the deep, unshakable peace that comes from knowing there was never anything to lose. The withdrawal from everyone is not abandonment. It is return. Return to the source, to the silence, to the truth that has no name. They become like still water, reflecting everything yet clinging to nothing. In that stillness, they discover that to withdraw is not to leave the world behind. It is to finally see it as it truly is. As the awakened one deepens into solitude, an unfamiliar serenity begins to emerge, a quiet contentment that no longer depends on what happens outside. Alan Watts described this state as the art of letting life happen. It's a profound reversal of everything we've been taught. Society tells us to pursue, to chase, to fight for our place. But the awakened discovers that real peace arrives when the pursuit ends. They no longer chase meaning. They see that meaning is inherent in every breath, every falling leaf, every fleeting moment. What once felt like chaos now feels like rhythm. What once felt random now feels orchestrated, not by a god in the clouds, but by the eternal flow of existence itself. In this space of still awareness, relationships take on a different hue. The awakened no longer loves out of need, but out of recognition. They love not because someone completes them, but because they see themselves in everything. This is the love that asks for nothing. The love that Alan Watts said comes naturally when you understand you and the universe are not two things. Yet, this kind of love frightens those still asleep. It cannot be controlled or possessed. It has no beginning and no end. So the awakened one often walks alone, not because they reject love, but because they embody a love too vast for form. The withdrawal deepens not into isolation, but into unity. The awakened begins to feel the pulse of existence in all things. The wind as breath, the rain as tears, the sun as a reminder that everything shines from the same source. They realize there is no boundary between observer and observed. The same awareness that watches the sunrise is the same awareness that burns within the sun. In this recognition, the need for approval or understanding dissolves. The awakened becomes free, not in rebellion, but in acceptance. And yet, the paradox persists. The freer they become, the more detached they seem. Those around them often misinterpret this as indifference, but the awakened knows that trying to explain would only create further illusion. They understand that words are just ripples on the surface, while truth lies deep beneath. They choose silence, not as avoidance, but as a form of communication deeper than speech. Silence becomes their teacher, their prayer, their companion. Through silence, they realize that the universe has always been speaking. Only now, they can finally hear it. So they continue walking quietly through life, unseen yet seeing everything. Their withdrawal becomes a kind of invisible grace, a subtle vibration that touches those who are ready. Alan Watts once said, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." The awakened has joined that dance, not as a performer, but as the music itself. They withdraw not because they've turned away, but because they've turned inward, where the dance never ends. The deeper the awakened one travels inward, the more they realize that solitude is not a place. It is a state of being. It is the still point at the center of the spinning world. Alan Watts taught that when you stop trying to hold the water, you finally see the reflection clearly. The awakened learns this truth intimately. In letting go of attachments, they find clarity. In stepping away from noise, they find depth. The world no longer appears as something to conquer, but as something to understand. Every difficulty, every loss, every encounter becomes a mirror revealing a hidden part of themselves. As their awareness sharpens, the awakened begins to sense the hidden suffering behind human behavior. They see how people chase pleasure to escape pain, how they seek control to mask fear, and how they mistake movement for meaning. And instead of judging, they feel compassion. A deep, wordless compassion. Not the kind that tries to save others, but the kind that quietly holds space for them. They understand that each person awakens in their own time, just as each flower blooms in its own season. This realization frees them from the urge to fix, correct, or preach. The awakened becomes a witness to life, not its manager. This witnessing transforms how they experience time. The past no longer imprisons them, and the future no longer entices them. They live in the eternal now, the only real moment there ever is. Alan Watts often spoke of this, how life is not a journey from point A to point B, but a symphony meant to be played. The awakened finally hears the music and stops trying to rush to the end. Every note, joy, pain, laughter, silence, has its place. To withdraw from everyone is not to abandon the orchestra, but to stop playing out of tune with one's own soul. The world, however, keeps spinning at its dizzying pace. People continue to run, to chase, to compare. And the awakened, standing still amidst the chaos, often appears invisible. But in that invisibility, they find freedom. They are no longer bound by others' perceptions. Praise and blame lose their power. Approval and rejection become the same wind passing through the trees. The awakened smiles quietly, knowing that everything is as it should be, even the parts that seem broken. And perhaps this is the greatest secret of withdrawal. It is not escape, but alignment. The awakened no longer tries to force harmony. They become harmony. They live as the wave that knows it is the ocean. And in that knowing, they finally rest. For as Alan Watts would remind us, you are the universe experiencing itself. To withdraw, then, is not to disappear, it is to return home. There is a moment in the journey of awakening when even solitude begins to dissolve. The awakened one realizes that they were never truly alone, that the same consciousness which breathes within them animates the stars, the oceans, and the faces they once turned away from. Alan Watts often spoke about this paradox. To find unity, one must first separate. To truly love the world, one must first step back from it. Withdrawal, then, is not the final destination, but the bridge, the sacred silence before the rediscovery of connection. The awakened return to the world not as participants in its drama, but as witnesses of its beauty. As they move through life, the awakened see with new eyes. Every person becomes a reflection of the infinite. Every gesture, no matter how small, carries the rhythm of the cosmos. The separation between me and them becomes a playful illusion, a trick of the mind that no longer deceives. Alan Watts would say that awakening is the realization that you are something the whole universe is doing. The awakened no longer feel the need to fix people or correct the world. They simply allow life to unfold as it will, understanding that every storm eventually clears, and every wave eventually returns to the sea. This awareness brings a soft humility. The awakened no longer walk with pride, but with gratitude. They realize that even awakening itself was not something they achieved. It was grace, the effortless unfolding of understanding. The ego once claimed credit for insight, but now, even that dissolves. There is no I who awakened, only awakening itself, happening through the form temporarily called me. This surrender is not defeat, it is freedom. The awakened no longer wrestles with life. They flow with it, dancing to the rhythm that has always been there. Yet, this deep peace often contrasts sharply with the noise of the world. People mistake their calmness for detachment, their silence for indifference. But the awakened understands that trying to explain this peace to those still caught in the storm would be like describing color to someone who has never seen light. So they smile instead. They live quietly, radiating a kind of invisible warmth that touches hearts without words. Their mere presence becomes a reminder that serenity is possible, that there is another way to exist. And perhaps this is the hidden purpose behind their withdrawal, to become a living embodiment of stillness. They no longer preach or persuade. They are, as Alan Watts taught, the meaning of life is just to be alive. The awakened one embodies this truth fully, not through ambition, but through awareness. They withdraw not to escape, but to remain untouched by illusion. In their stillness, the noise of the world fades into harmony, and for those who listen closely, the silence begins to sing. As the awakened continues their inward journey, they begin to notice something subtle yet profound, that even the desire to stay awakened can become a trap. Alan Watts often warned against making spirituality another form of achievement. He said that awakening is not a badge to wear, but a state of seeing clearly. The moment the awakened tries to hold on to enlightenment, it slips through their fingers like water. True freedom lies not in clinging to awareness, but in trusting its flow, allowing awakening to live, breathe, and evolve naturally. This realization humbles the awakened deeply. They no longer seek to maintain an image of wisdom or serenity. They laugh more, cry more, stumble without shame. They see that even the so-called unawakened moments are part of the same divine play. Life, in its entirety, becomes sacred, not because it is perfect, but because it is whole. Alan Watts described this as the dance of life, where every step, even a misstep, belongs. To withdraw, then, is to recognize that there was never a wrong note in the song, only misunderstood harmony. From this state of effortless acceptance, the awakened begin to re-enter the world, but differently. They move through it as though they were walking through a dream they now understand. They participate, but without being consumed. They care deeply, but without attachment. This balance, engagement without entanglement, becomes their quiet mastery. They can sit amidst chaos and remain still inside, not because they are detached, but because they finally see that chaos, too, is part of the cosmic order. Those who encounter them often feel something they can't explain, a calm, a depth, a quiet reassurance. The awakened does not teach through doctrine, but through presence. They show by being. Alan Watts would often remind his listeners that the most profound truths cannot be spoken, only felt. And so, the awakened withdraw from words and allow silence to become their language. Their eyes speak more than their voice ever could, saying without saying, "You are already what you seek." And so, their withdrawal completes its circle. What began as solitude becomes connection. What began as silence becomes understanding. The awakened no longer separates themselves from the world. They see the world as a reflection of the same consciousness they discovered within. They walk among others like the wind, touching everything, grasping nothing. They know now that to withdraw from everyone was never to leave humanity, but to rediscover what it truly means to be human. There comes a quiet point where the awakened one begins to see the elegance of impermanence. What once felt like loss now feels like rhythm, the rise and fall of tides, the ebb and flow of experience. Alan Watts often compared life to music. Its beauty lies not in its permanence, but in its transience. The awakened finally understands that everything, relationships, emotions, even thoughts, is meant to pass through. They no longer resist the ending of things. Instead, they bow to it, like one bows to a closing song, grateful for having heard it all. This understanding softens them. They no longer need to hold on to anything, for they have discovered that what is real cannot be lost. Love does not vanish when someone leaves. Peace does not fade when circumstances change. Everything that comes also goes, and everything that goes makes space for something new. The awakened learns to trust this unseen order. In the constant dying and being born again of every moment, they see the heartbeat of existence itself. Withdrawal becomes less of a retreat and more of a dance, a graceful step back that allows the whole picture to appear. From this place, the awakened sees that suffering was never punishment. It was the teacher. Every heartbreak, every disappointment, every moment of confusion was simply life removing what was never real. Alan Watts said, "Muddy water is best clear by leaving it alone." The awakened understands this now. They no longer try to fix themselves or the world. They allow clarity to arise on its own. By stepping back, everything falls into place naturally. They see that life has always been taking care of itself, even when they believe they were the ones steering. And in that realization, a great laugh often comes, the kind that shakes the soul with relief. The awakened laugh not at the world, but with it. They laugh at how seriously they once took their problems, how tightly they once held their masks, how desperately they once sought meaning in what was already meaningful. This laughter is liberation. It is the sound of the universe exhaling through them, reminding them that the game was never about winning or losing. It was about remembering. Remembering that all separation, all struggle, all seeking was just the infinite pretending to be finite for a little while. So, the awakened walk lightly. They expect nothing, resist nothing, and carry nothing but awareness. In every face, they see the same divine spark playing its part. In every sound, they hear the same eternal note. They realize that to withdraw from everyone is not to turn away from life. It is to stand so still that life itself begins to flow through you unhindered. As Alan Watts would say, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." Now, the awakened lives without the boundaries they once defended. There is no inner and outer, no self and other, only the dance of existence moving as one. The separation that once drove them to withdraw has dissolved into a vast, compassionate seeing. Alan Watts described it as the awakening from the illusion of separateness. The awakened has stopped trying to distinguish where they end and the world begins. They realized there was never a line, only the illusion of one drawn by thought. The dreamer and the dream were always the same. This awareness brings with it an unshakable calm. Life continues. Storms still come. People still change. Losses still occur. Yet nothing disturbs the center. It is not indifference, but profound intimacy with all that is. The awakened no longer reacts. They respond. No longer resist. They allow. In every moment, they sense the underlying harmony that weaves through chaos, like a hidden melody beneath the noise. They have stopped seeking control because they have seen the futility of trying to manage what was never separate from themselves. As they move among others, their presence becomes medicine, not through words or actions, but through vibration. They do not preach enlightenment, they embody it. They listen deeply, see clearly, and love quietly. Those who meet them often cannot explain why they feel lighter in their company. It is because, for a brief moment, they touch the same stillness the awakened lives in permanently. Alan Watts once said, "The only way to make sense of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." The awakened now dances effortlessly, one with the music they once feared. And perhaps the final truth is this: the awakened never truly withdrew. They only stepped back far enough to see the whole. Their silence was not separation, but comprehension, the understanding that words could no longer capture what is infinite. They did not turn their back on humanity. They simply turned toward the eternal. And in doing so, they discovered that both were one and the same. In this state, there is no desire to return or to remain. There is only being, pure, unconditioned, luminous being. The awakened stands where all opposites meet: solitude and connection, silence and sound, life and death. They see that everything is a reflection of everything else, endlessly arising and dissolving in perfect harmony. And in the infinite stillness that remains, they finally understand what Alan Watts meant when he said, "You are the universe looking at itself and saying, 'Ah, that's how it feels to be me.'" In this final depth of understanding, the awakened one begins to perceive existence not as something happening to them, but through them. The illusion of being a separate observer has faded like mist under the morning sun. Alan Watts often said that awakening is the recognition that you are the process, not the product. The awakened no longer feels like a character trapped within the story, but as the story itself unfolding perfectly, line by line, without beginning or end. Every joy, every sorrow, every fleeting encounter now feels sacred, not because it lasts, but because it doesn't. Transience itself becomes divine. The world no longer feels like a stage of struggle, but a field of play. There is no longer the compulsion to win or achieve, only the freedom to experience. The awakened moves through life as a wave gliding upon the sea, neither separate from the ocean nor bound by its depths. They no longer search for meaning because they are meaning. Every breath becomes prayer, every silence becomes song, and every moment, even the mundane, becomes a revelation of the eternal. It is in this ordinariness that they discover the extraordinary. And yet, paradoxically, their withdrawal from everyone now feels like the deepest union of all. Having stepped away from the illusions of separation, they now see that they never truly left anyone behind. The same consciousness that breathes within their chest beats within every heart. The same awareness that watches through their eyes gazes through the eyes of all. The awakened no longer sees others, only reflections of the same infinite self, wearing countless masks, playing countless roles. Their compassion expands beyond the human, to animals, to the earth, to the stars. All of it is one vast, breathing being. In this space, even language begins to fade. The awakened speaks less because there is less to explain. Words divide what has become indivisible. Alan Watts used to remind his listeners that the menu is not the meal. And so, the awakened stops describing life and begins tasting it fully, raw, direct, without commentary. They let go of philosophy, even of spirituality itself, for both belong to the mind. What remains is pure awareness, silent, vast, and endlessly alive. This is where withdrawal finds its true meaning. It was never about running away, but about remembering what could only be found in silence. The awakened does not live apart from the world, but within it, untouched, yet intimately connected. Their presence becomes like air, invisible, essential, and boundless. They are nowhere and everywhere, belonging to no one, yet belonging to all. And through this quiet existence, they reveal the ultimate paradox Alan Watts devoted his life to teaching, that to awaken fully is not to leave life behind, but to finally live it. Now, at the furthest edge of the journey, where silence becomes truth and truth becomes silence, the awakened realizes that there was never a path to begin with. The search was the illusion. The destination was always here. Alan Watts once said, "You are already it. You just don't know it." And in this moment of recognition, all seeking ceases. The awakened stops trying to hold on to enlightenment, because even enlightenment was just another shadow cast by the mind. What remains is simplicity, pure, effortless being. They look around and see the world as it truly is, a continuous miracle disguised as ordinary life. The laughter of a child, the rustle of leaves, the hum of traffic, all of it sings the same eternal melody. There is no hierarchy of experience anymore. Nothing is higher or lower, sacred or profane. The awakened sees that the divine hides in plain sight, not in temples or rituals, but in every heartbeat, in every sigh, in every instant that passes unnoticed. This realization makes them tender, humble, and profoundly alive. The withdrawal, which once seemed like solitude, now reveals itself as communion. To be alone was to merge with all things. To be silent was to hear everything. The awakened no longer tries to explain or convince anyone of what they've found, for they know that everyone, in their own time, will come to the same realization. Life itself is the teacher, and every experience, no matter how painful, is part of its divine curriculum. As Alan Watts said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The awakened stops trying. They simply are. And in that being, something miraculous unfolds, an ease beyond effort, a joy beyond cause. They live each day without resistance, responding to life as a mirror reflects light. There is no tension, no striving, only awareness dancing through form. People still come and go, storms still rise and fall, but none of it disturbs the stillness within. This is not detachment. It is intimacy so complete that it no longer needs to cling. The awakened loves without possession, gives without expectation, and walks without destination. Finally, they see that their withdrawal from everyone was never a retreat from love, but its deepest expression. For only when one ceases to grasp at life can one truly embrace it. They have dissolved into the whole, become the song rather than the singer, the ocean rather than the wave. There is no longer an awakened person, only awakening, endlessly unfolding. And as the last illusion fades, the eternal truth stands quietly revealed. Nothing was ever lost, nothing was ever missing. Everything, from the very beginning, was home. In the end, the withdrawal of the awakened is not a departure, it is a return to what has always been true, always been whole. Through solitude, silence, and surrender, they discover that the journey was never about escaping the world but about seeing it clearly for the first time. What looked like separation was actually merging. What felt like loss was transformation. The awakened do not live above life or outside of it. They live within it, fully, freely, without illusion. They become like the sky, vast, untouched, yet embracing everything beneath it. Every stage of their withdrawal now reveals its purpose. The silence taught them how to listen. The solitude showed them the beauty of connection. The surrender stripped away everything false until only truth remained. In that truth, they found not isolation but unity, not emptiness but fullness. The awakened now walks among others as part of the same eternal rhythm that beats in all hearts. Their very being whispers what words never could. That peace was never elsewhere, that enlightenment was never a place to reach, but a state of remembering. And that remembering is the essence of awakening. To see life not as something happening to you, but through you. To stop resisting what is, and to let existence express itself effortlessly through your form. Alan Watts often said that the meaning of life is just to be alive. The awakened now embodies this truth. They no longer ask how to live. They are life, pulsing with the same mysterious intelligence that moves the stars. In their stillness, they invite others to see that same truth reflected in themselves. So perhaps that is the message for all of us. Awakening is not a privilege of the few. It is the destiny of everyone who dares to stop running. You do not need to withdraw from the world to awaken. You only need to withdraw from the illusion of separation. When you see that everything you seek has been within you from the beginning, the search ends, and the dance begins. Life ceases to be a struggle and becomes an endless unfolding, a sacred play where every joy and sorrow finds its place in the great harmony of existence. If this reflection resonated with you, if something within you stirred, as though remembering something ancient and true, let it be the beginning of your own quiet awakening. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this message with those who are still searching. Not because they need to be taught, but because they, too, are ready to remember. After all, as Alan once reminded us, you are the universe looking at itself. And maybe it's time you finally recognized your own reflection.